It's the coaches that make it fun. And if you ask children, they know how to define fun. Fun for them means that the coach cares about me. It means that the coach develops a practice that keeps me active and helps me improve my skills. It's the coaches who make every kid feel like they're valued and who meets every kid exactly where they are. And if you do that, then you're the best coach ever.
Hello and welcome to the Sunshine Parenting Podcast, where each week we talk about ideas for raising kids who become thriving adults. I'm your host, Audrey Monkey. Here on the podcast, I share my experiences raising 5 kids who currently range in age from 16 to 26 and working with thousands more as a summer camp director over the past 3 decades. I'm the author of Happy Campers, and I frequently do workshops with parents, teachers, and summer camp professionals about social skills, connection, and happiness, topics I researched extensively for my master's in psychology. If you want tools for raising kind, optimistic, self-reliant kids who become thriving adults, you've come to the right place. Hey, Sunshine Parenting listeners, welcome to episode 131, my interview with Dr. Jennifer Etnier about her book, Coaching for the Love of the Game, a practical guide for working with young athletes. Before we get to this important and informative interview, I want to share with you this week's one simple thing. Every family has some time of day that tends to be the hot spot or sort of the low point of family life. It's the time of day when one or more people in the family are not in a pleasant mood or things feel rushed and chaotic. My one simple thing tip for this week is to take some time to assess what is the least pleasant time of day in your home. Often the first step to solving a problem is identifying it. So simply by identifying what your family's hot spots are in the day could be the start to you thinking up strategies and ideas for making that time of day more pleasant. And now it's time for this week's interview. Youth sports are huge, and many adults find ourselves as either professional or amateur coaches of kids in their recreational or competitive sports. Dr. Jennifer Etnier's book, Coaching for the Love of the Game, sheds light on the importance of having a positive impact when we're working with kids in youth sports. Her book clearly outlines simple strategies that coaches can use to be sure that the coaching that they are giving the kids is a positive experience that promotes the sport and promotes kids' continued physical activity. I'm thrilled to have had the opportunity to read Dr. Etnier's book, and I really want to get it into the hands of everyone who works coaching kids in youth sports. Welcome to the podcast, Jenny.
Thank you. It's so nice to be here.
So I'm really excited to talk to you today about your work you do and the book you wrote. So why don't you just start by introducing yourself and telling my listeners about what you do, where you're from, and all that good stuff.
Yeah, sure. So my name's Jenny Etnier, and I'm a distinguished professor at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. And I'm a sport and exercise psychologist. And I've been involved in youth sport as a young athlete many, many years ago, as a parent of young athletes, and then also as a coach. And I've done a lot of work with the United States Soccer Federation and their coaching education program.
So you were a soccer player yourself, is that right?
Yeah, predominantly. I played every sport I possibly could, but I focused on soccer as I moved into college and adulthood.
And I think I read somewhere that you went even like semi-pro or something.
Yeah, I got to do that in Arizona a little bit. It was a lot of fun. Yeah, so soccer is definitely where my passion is, and all of my kids are still playing soccer, which is fun. But basically, all I need is a ball and a net, and somebody point me in the right direction, and I'll be looking forward to participating.
Oh, that's so fun. How old are your kids now, Jenny?
I have twin boys who are 13, so they're 7th graders, and then I have a daughter who's 15, so she's a 9th grader.
Okay, so if they're all doing sports, you're in the thick of it right now.
We are, and we have been for a few years, and we're,
Yes.
every day, as you know, as a parent, every day is juggling practices and games and dinners and all of those things.
And meanwhile, being a college professor and writing books and all that,
Yeah, trying.
That's great. Well, I really enjoyed your book, Coaching for the Love of the Game. The subtitle is A Practical Guide for Working with Young Athletes. And I just think your book is really, really needed right now because, as you say in the book, so many people coach. There are some professional coaches, or there's their main job, but many parents just serve as, the coach of their kids' team. I coached my kids' soccer teams when they were little. And, around age 10, I was like, okay, I'm done. It gets way too competitive. But so I think it's just such a valuable resource, and it's a really easy read. So I'm excited to share with my community about the book and some of your big ideas. So why don't you start a little bit about just telling us why you wrote this particular book?
Yeah, sure. So unfortunately, it starts with sort of a bit of a negative spin. So as my children were experiencing youth sport, I found myself waking up at 4 a.m. many, many, many a night, trying to write in my mind an email to a coach whose behavior I thought was having a negative impact on a child. And most of the time, it wasn't my child. Most of the time, my children were fine and they were happy, but it was somebody else's child who wasn't getting playing time or wasn't being treated with respect or was being, denigrated in front of his or her peers. And so I guess one morning I finally woke up and I was like, I can't keep doing this. I need to try to, it's something I'm passionate about is improving the youth sport experience. And so I thought instead of trying to help individual coaches solve individual problems, let me see if I can do something that could potentially have a bigger effect. So I literally woke up and thought, I have got to write a book. I have got to try to get the word out to the wonderful parent volunteers, to the coaches in middle school and high school, who I feel sure all have incredibly positive intentions, but mostly because of a lack of experience or a lack of education or whatever it might be, the impact they're having on the kids is not always positive. And so I wrote the book hoping to have a more pervasive, positive effect on the youth sport experience.
Yeah, I agree with you so much. I mean, I think every parent, and even as a kid, I can remember my own sports experiences. You remember the coaches, you remember the ones who were just so much fun and loved being with the team and really built you up. And then you definitely remember those negative comments that just kind of seared into you, or, sitting on the bench endlessly, or,
Right.
I agree that it's just such an important message to get out. And I feel bad because like a lot of times people who get into coaching, it's because they love the sport themselves and they don't really have any training in communicating with kids, developing positive relationships with kids, and some of these important things that really will help them create that positive experience. So I love that you wrote this book, and I do hope it gets into the hands of everyone from the casual coach part-time to the professional, because I think sometimes the coaches that people see on TV or whatever are not always modeling the practices that great coaches really do practice.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. And the negative impact on the kids can be so long lasting, right? So I think you're right. I mean, I hope all of us have had the opportunity to work with great coaches, right? But great coaches doesn't mean we won state championships. Great coaches means we had an incredibly positive experience and we felt like we moved towards our potential as athletes and as young people, right? And so, when I think of great coach, I'm not thinking of the winningest coach. I'm thinking of the coach that had the biggest, most long-lasting positive impact on the largest number of kids. Because that's why we as parents put our kids in youth sport, right? That's why we started in this. We want them to develop their character. We want them to develop friendships. We want them to learn, how to be their best selves in competitive settings, how to deal with victory and defeat. But we certainly didn't put them out there to be yelled at and to have the pressure of winning. And those aren't the reasons we got into it in the first place. And sometimes we forget that, I think.
Yeah, I think in a lot of our work with kids, people forget that the bigger goal is much bigger than that particular thing you're doing in the moment. So whether it's
Yeah.
sports or an activity at school or even with parenting, sometimes we get really caught up in just like scores and, test metrics and all this stuff when the bigger picture, which is character development and
Hmm.
becoming a fully formed, happy human being, those are the more important goals. And sports are a great avenue to get there, like you said. And I would contend, and I think you even say this in the book, that it's the coaches who are those great coaches who really build the kids up, help them learn skills, develop a love of the game, end up likely probably winning more anyway because it's the backwards path that is actually a better path than threatening, demeaning, making people feel bad. So whether you win or lose doesn't really matter, and nobody remembers that game when you were 8 years old.
Yeah.
But you will remember having a lot of fun with your team and having the pizza party afterwards.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's exactly right. It's the fun part that makes it, that makes it enjoyable, right? Okay, that doesn't make much sense. But yes, it's
Yeah.
true. It's the coaches that make it fun. And children, if you ask children, they know how to define fun, right? So fun for them means that the coach cares about me. It means that the coach develops a practice that keeps me active and helps me improve my skills. It's the coaches who make every kid feel like they're valued and who meets every kid exactly where they are, right? So if you are a volunteer youth sport coach, then you probably have kids on your team who range from being, really apt beginners to being incredibly skillful. Well, your job is to make every single one of those children feel like you think they're the most important player on the team. And if you do that, then you're the best coach ever.
That is beautiful. That's quotable right there. Well, it's funny. I love that, it's funny because kids, so I run a children's summer camp. And of course, the expectation when you come to camp is that it's going to be fun. And I would say that when kids sign up for a team, they want to be with their friends. They want to have fun. They want to make friends. It's really, that's kind of in life too, even adults, like we do things because we want that community and we want to enjoy ourselves. And so we need to help create those kind of experiences for our kids. So I love that. So you talk about your why very, very clearly in your introduction about just you want them to have a positive experience, have fun, develop as individuals, and grow to love the game. I
Mm-hmm.
think the opposite of that, when coaches aren't positive, is kids quit. They have a bad experience and then they either are done with that sport or done with all sports, which is such a shame.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point because, as somebody who's devoted their life and their career to the study of kinesiology, the study of human movement, right? My, if you ask me like in a really big picture, I want all of these children who come out to play soccer when they're 8 to still be physically active when they're young adults. And sports is just one venue, it's just one way that you can do that. You can jog, you can bike, you can do whatever. But if children have a negative experience in sport, we actually know that 70% of them drop out before they're 13 years of age. 70%, right? Not 5%, not 10%, more than half. And many of them never return to sport, and many of them have a hard time becoming physically active as adults. And the number one reason they quit, which just strikes me as so ironic, is because they say it's no longer any fun. Well, how, I just think, how is that possible? How can you take a sport which is inherently fun? It was created to be fun. It's the only reason it exists. It's the only reason it should exist, right? So how can that suddenly become so unenjoyable that you drop out completely? And, so that's really why I wrote this book is I'm just trying to get the important information into the hands of people who I think can make a big difference. And I think that's the coaches, but the coaches have already demonstrated their commitment to these children. They've already demonstrated their commitment to the sport. Now I think these coaches just need to have in their hands a toolkit that allows them to work effectively with kids to make sure that they all have a positive experience.
Yeah, you really outline the way the book reads is really easy to read. So even coaches who aren't big readers, I think, can get a lot out of this, even just by pulling like one chapter at a time. You have these key points and key quotes pulled out. You give the scientific evidence for why a practice is important. And then you have some good kind of reflection questions or an activity that they can do. So I would love to see, how you have, like I remember when I was a soccer coach, I had some training. It'd be great to have this be part of coaches training for any sport where they use some of these exercises as a group to discuss, well, how are we going to apply that in our league this year? I could see this being a great kind of read along book for people doing the training, because I think they get very fixated on, well, here's some drills you can do, and here's the new ref rules this year. But this is the important stuff, at least to me, the not very good athlete. The important stuff for me was always being in the van with my friends, going to games and stuff. I loved the social aspects of sports.
Right. Well, I want the not very good athlete to stick with it forever, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, into adulthood, I mean, why wouldn't you? It should be fun. I mean, I do think it's fascinating. So we have approximately 4 million volunteer coaches in this country. Hard to estimate, but that's the number they give us. Fewer than 5% have any relevant training. Now, if you translated that to other settings where we have adults working with our children, like I immediately start thinking of teachers. Can you imagine letting your child go spend hours a week with a teacher who says to you, I have no relevant training. I don't know anything about child development. I don't know anything about pedagogy or teaching skills. Yeah, I to use a teaching analogy, I remember having math back when I was a kid, but that's the extent of my knowledge, right? Like, here, take my child. I mean, to me, it's just kind of ludicrous, and it's disappointing that we as a country haven't figured out how to ensure that all of these willing volunteers, who again, I know are well-intentioned, to ensure that they have the necessary education, which isn't about drills. It's about working with young people. It's about creating a positive sport experience. One important thing that I've actually learned recently, so I wasn't able to include it in my book, I didn't realize that in Norway, in the country of Norway, they have something called the, let me get the name right, it's the Children's Rights in Sports, which is a national policy. And it says that, it essentially says that nobody is going to care about keeping score until you're a teenager. Nobody's going to care about keeping score until you're a teenager. Once you're a teenager, then we'll talk about it. But before that, the 1 and 2 priorities, safety, friendship, and enjoyment. Those are the priorities. And actually, they're not priorities, they're rights. They're described as a children's rights in sport, to be kept safe, to make friends, and to have fun. And to me, it's just like, wow, I wish that we had policy like that in this country. And if it couldn't be countrywide, maybe it could be sport-wide. I think various sporting organizations are working towards this, but sometimes I think it's just this education piece for these mostly parent volunteer coaches who turn over every year, right? So you mentioned that you'd done it, Audrey, but you probably only did it for a year or two, and then some next parent took over, right? So the education has to stay permanently available so that all of these parent volunteers can make themselves more well educated about how to work with children.
Yeah, I ended up actually doing it for a lot of years, but what I would do is I started with my oldest daughter and coached her when she was little, and then I would go to my next one. And so because I really enjoy getting the kids to have fun together and get to be friends, more of the campy aspects of it. So,
Right.
So I feel like skill level wise, I'm better at beginner. So, so I coached for a lot of years because I just like being with the kids though, and having fun with them. And definitely I have no idea what our records were. I think
that, that makes sort of an important point with your background as a camp director. At camp, there's no winners and losers, right? And so the vast majority of kids go to camp and have a wonderfully positive experience, right? Unfortunately, the vast majority of kids in youth sport end up at the end having some negative experience that chases them out of the sport.
That's just,
and so I think it's partly, so that's another thing I haven't mentioned yet, but it's partly this mistaken notion that winning matters. I mean, you said it a few minutes ago. It really doesn't matter when you're 8, but does it matter when you're 12? Doesn't matter to me. When I ask my kids when they come home, if I wasn't at their game, which is rare, but if I wasn't there, I'll say, how'd it go? And usually they'll start off by saying, oh, we won 2-0, or we lost 3-1. And I'll say, why in the world would you tell me that? I don't care about that. And they'll be like, okay, well, I had a good time. And I'm like, well, did you play hard? Yeah, I played hard. What about your other friends? Who else played well? And so our whole dialogue around youth sport, I think, really needs to change to take this focus off of winning, because there is really no reason to care about winning and losing when we're talking about preteens. And even, I could get on a high horse and say, I'm not really sure it matters in high school either. The vast majority of kids are playing sports for fun. The vast majority of kids, the sport experience is merely a way for them to be physically active, to have friends, to make friends, to socialize. The folks who think that their child is going to play sport at the collegiate level, wow, they haven't looked at the numbers, right? Over 7 million high school athletes, 150,000 will get NCAA scholarships. And of those, 1,400 are going to play a sport professionally. So you're going from 7.3 million down to 150,000 and 1,400. So that means there are about 7 million kids who are not going to play college sport, high school athletes who aren't going to play college sport. But I want them to have a great experience.
Yeah. I think parents, I think this is just, unfortunately, we're wired to think that our kids are so special. It was like, it's like we're just, of course we think our kids are great. And I think people don't have the bigger perspective that even when your child is the star of their 12-year-old, whatever sport team, that there are, like you said, 6 million.
Lots of stars.
Yes,
right?
there's stars everywhere, and it's great for kids to enjoy. But like you said, we've lost a little bit of sight of the end goal, which is we want more kids to be active. So turning to that, I really liked, you have a great diagram, which I think I'll include in the show notes. It's on page 7. And you say, and this is part of your mission, and I agree wholeheartedly, being active is so important. When you said that kids drop out at 13, oh my gosh, when we know that exercise and activity is so important for mental health, for physical health, for just well-being in general and our happiness, the fact that, and organized sports are just a good way to get kids regular exercise. So talk about just some of your findings about what the research is showing about why active kids just do better just in all areas of life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to clarify, Audrey, I didn't develop the figure. And the reason I want to make sure to clarify that, not just to give credit where credit is due, but also because there's an organization called the Aspen Institute. They have a project play, which is basically they're trying to advocate for some of the same things that I'm saying, and they're doing it at a national level. They're doing some great work. So they gave us permission to include this figure in the book. And it does tell a great story. It really sort of emphasizes all the positive things that we know result from being physically active. My own, I do research also as a faculty member, and the research that I do is focused on how exercise benefits cognition. And so we have all kinds of studies that show that children who exercise during the school day can do better on various measures of cognition, on tests of memory, problem solving, all of these sorts of things. And there's also this really important body of literature that shows that being physically active helps with executive function. I don't know if that's a term you're familiar with. It's a little bit of a hot term, right? Executive control, executive function. These are like the self-regulatory abilities that people have. Essentially, I think of it as to make good decisions, right? So people who are physically active as children have stronger or better self-regulatory skills, which allows them to be better decision makers, which means that the physical activity behavior sort of sets the stage for more positive choices in terms of a healthy lifestyle. So that means that they tend not to smoke, not to use drugs, not to practice risky sex behaviors. They do better on academic tests because of the cognitive benefits I mentioned. They choose to eat better. And so all of those things then, when you think about that going through your whole lifetime, end up resulting in all of these outcomes that are just very positive. And those are broader than just physical health, because then they transcend and become part of your mental health as well.
Yeah, it's really, I just think it's fabulous to just think about this. And I know it's funny because my husband and I are both runners. My husband's done like triathlons and stuff too. And I never ran. I did some track in high school, but I was just kind of like wanted to be more on the sport. I did volleyball during the fall instead of running, which I would have been better at. But as an adult, even as an adult, I find that I do so much better at work having exercised even just a little bit in the morning. And it's just amazing to me that that's just not part of every single school. even if the kids had to get there at 8 and there was, 10 or 15 minutes of running around and playing and getting your blood pumping, because, I know that the research is showing that kids who do that reduce their, they're better at paying attention. Like you said, all the important things. So a teacher, it's funny, my daughter who teaches kindergarten, she knows from camp and from growing up with me, if the kids are getting squirrely, get up, do some jumping jacks, do a dance together, go run once around the yard, and it's remarkable what just for adults and kids, just getting your heart pumping, a little bit of activity just kind of clears the cobwebs, makes you better at everything else.
Well, yeah. And when you say that, it actually, brings home a really important point, which is that if children are dropping out of youth sport and we're not offering physical education in the schools to the extent that we used to, and as we all know, the pressures in our society are such that we're becoming increasingly sedentary, then where are they going to be physically active? I mean, truthfully, it's almost a public health imperative that we ensure that our youth sport experience is positive, because we actually have huge numbers of the kids when they're little. We have huge numbers, more than 20 million children are involved in youth sport. But then we don't cherish that opportunity to make sure that they all have a positive experience and stick with it. If we could crack this nut, it would solve all kinds of challenges that we have in this country, with the obesity epidemic, with sedentary lifestyle. If we're not going to do physical education in the schools, then youth sport's our chance. So we have to make sure it's a positive experience.
And I would say too, just like for parents who are like, oh no, my kid isn't doing sports anymore. I think even in our families, and there are other ways to be active. And like, I know it's funny because my kids, I'm just trying to think if anyone, a couple of my kids were in smaller high schools where they did sports, but a lot of the schools like near us, the public high schools, you can't even get on the team. You have to be like practically, a pro and be very invested and do the year-round club thing. And it's just a huge thing. And it's like for our family and our schedule and how many kids we had, it was just not realistic to be so invested in one particular sport. But what's interesting is I have 3 adult kids now, and they all still hike, run. They're very physically active. They go to spin classes, they go to yoga with friends. So I've seen that just by being in a family with, and it shows on here that active parents are associated with active kids. Even just as parents, if you're concerned about your kids' activity, just going for a walk with them or going for a bike ride and just kind of getting it to be part of your family routine. Or going out and playing tennis with them, doing things that are like sports that maybe aren't in such a formal setting is also really a great way to connect with kids and just have fun. Like at the rec.
Sorry. Yeah, that's such a great comment, Audrey. I mean, I completely agree. My kids know, if I put the word family in front of any activity, it means we're all going, right? So I'll say, we're going on a family bike ride. And they're like, okay, and they know that means we're all going, or we're going to play family football, or we're going to play family soccer, or family pickleball, or we're going on a family walk, whatever it is. Recently, my 15-year-old daughter and I have been walking together very, very regularly because she didn't play a winter sport. And so we've been just really committed to it. And I am telling you, that is the best possible time that any parent could have with their teenage child. I mean, we have an hour. We walk for an hour. We walk the dogs. We meet the neighbors. We meet the neighbors' dogs, and it's just, it's actually about community building. It's about having my daughter have an opportunity to speak to adults in the neighborhood that she might not otherwise speak to. It's beautiful. But the other comment I want to make is that that you made me think of is, I've seen some sport clubs that have on their web pages this pyramid-shaped diagram that shows how they're going to funnel children. Essentially, they're trying to show it in a positive way. They're like trying to show it like we're going to funnel children up to elite levels of sport. So it's a triangle where at the bottom, everybody plays rec. And then at the next level, it starts to become more select. And then as it gets narrower towards the top, it becomes elite. Well, that model to me is just horrible. Why? You said, Audrey, like if you're at a huge public high school, you're competing for spots on the sport team. If you don't get one of those spots, then you don't play. Well, the clubs are doing the same thing because they stop offering as much recreational sport. And it's not completely their fault. The kids quit, but the kids quit because the message you sent them was that they're not good enough and you don't care about them. The message that you have on your webpage when you show this triangle is that your goal is to weed out the kids that aren't good enough to become elite. the figure should be a square box. It should be a square box where everybody who starts is in at the end, right? So everybody who's physically active as a kid is still physically active in high school. They're still physically active in college, and then into adulthood. They're still physically active. And like you said, having the opportunity to try lots of different sports and physical activities so that as an adult, like with your adult children, they recognize, oh, well, I played soccer in high school, but I'm not doing that competitively anymore. That doesn't mean I have to be inactive. I'm going to play tennis, or I'm going to hike, or I'm going to do spin class. Like you said, there's millions of options out there. But if you're not introduced as a child, another point that I make in my book is that sometimes we encourage kids to specialize too soon. If as a child you're not introduced to a variety of different forms of physical activity, if all you do is run or all you do is swim and you never played a racket sport, it's harder. It's harder. Like, I get that. It's harder to learn a racket sport as an adult. My kids, when they were little, we literally had tennis balls hanging on strings off the carport. And we would just send them out with a racket, tell them to try to hit the ball and not hit each other. And now we recently joined a sports club that has racquetball courts. My kids had never played racquetball, but because they've played tennis and pickleball and they hit a ball on a string on their carport, they can learn how to play racquetball. And so now we're playing racquetball together. So it's, I know I've gone off on a lot of ideas just then, but I think I get so passionate about this notion that children should have positive sport experiences across a wide variety of activities so that they want to continue to be physically active as young people and into adulthood.
Absolutely. And I just think about the basketball. Like, we have had a basketball hoop in our driveway forever. And I think maybe in like elementary school, a few of the kids played, but people still go out there and play. Yeah. It's like great, when friends come over, go out and shoot the basket a little bit. Ping pong. I get kind of sweaty sometimes playing with my kids.
Sure.
And that was, but that was kind of our fun thing with like teenage boys, like, oh, let's have a ping pong tournament after dinner or something, So,
right.
So I do think it's just a bigger picture, but I'm just really struck by, yes, your message. It's so important that we're forgetting the long-term goal, which is healthier, happier kids. Sports is one way to get them there. And we're kind of, by some of our practices, unfortunately, that's so sad to think that we're actually making it harder for kids to be active.
Yeah.
So there's a couple things I would love for you to cover. A couple things. One is just on page 14 in your book, you talk about what positive coaches do. I think just doing a quick summary of that. And then I want to have you talk to parents a little bit, because people who are listening who aren't coaches or aren't going to be coaches, but are parents, a lot of them have had experience as spectators. So I want you to share with that. So let's start with that. On page 14, you talk about just what a positive coach does. So why don't you cover that?
Sure. So I think one of the biggest things is really creating a climate where it's about personal improvement and not about outcome, not about beating the other person. It's about figuring out where each child is and helping each child improve from that point. One of the examples I give in my book is when I was a novice coach, I would be teaching kids playing soccer how to juggle the ball off their foot, where you bounce it up in the air off the top of your foot. And I would say, okay, go off and try it, come back in. I would say, who got the most? Well, duh, what I know now is I don't care who got the most. Why would I ask that question? Do I want to single out the best person and have everybody else feel like they're not worth my time? So now the more obvious question is, who improved, right? Or maybe if it's the first time, who tried hard? Who was able to get one or two touches? Who was able to knock it into their hands once? And then from there you can build on it. Okay, who improved? Who challenged themselves today by trying to use their opposite foot, their less strong foot? I think coaches have to treat athletes with respect, compassion, empathy. The best coach is the coach who truly loves those children and who loves and values every moment that they have to have an impact on that kid. And so, if you ask me, would I rather my kid had a coach who knew everything there was to know about soccer, I knew everything there was to know about developing young people? I would pick developing young people, of course. Soccer is just a byproduct. Soccer is just a fun way to develop my child into a happy, healthy young person, right? So positive coaching and the stuff that I have in my book, the information I have in my book is all evidence-based, but I've hopefully written it in a way that makes it very accessible to anybody who wants to take a look. But it's really just making the point that it's about the climate that you create as a coach and ensuring that that's positive for every child.
It's really just the same stuff that teachers, camp counselors, parents, I mean, really, it's all kind of circles back to the same thing. It's funny because I've done a talk with parents on and camp counselors on coaching your kids to better friendships.
Oh, cool.
And it's so interesting because so my contention is that friendship skills, social skills are just like other skills, but we tend not to look at them that way.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And some kids need, more help and more practice and role playing to learn different social skills or conversation skills and that kind of thing. And all of these things that you say about how to be a positive coach, it's for anything that you're helping your child learn.
That's right. That's right.
So, or a teacher with their students, same thing, just pointing out the one kid who, got 100% or really putting all the value on them isn't benefiting all the kids. But
That's
by saying, hey, who improved since last week on, whatever it is in school, those are the kinds of questions and the kinds of things that make the kids know that you care about them and that they're valued, even if, they're still learning something.
That's right. And one of the other points I want to make is that the negative behaviors that we tolerate from coaches are astounding, right? So you just made an important link, I think, which is that coaching is like teaching. Coaching is like any other adult position that has regular interactions with children. So like camp directors or camp counselors or teachers. But have you ever seen a teacher screaming at a child and poking their finger into the child's chest and telling them that they've messed up, that they've cost us the game or they've cost us the, the behavior that we tolerate in coaches is unbelievable. It's astounding. Sometimes it borders on child harassment and child abuse. And yet parents are there and they see it happening and they're just like, well, it's the coach's business. It's if that's the way the coach wants to treat the kids. It's amazing. They do physical punishments. What if your kid's teacher, what if your child came home and said, oh, my teacher got mad at the class today, so they told us to all get down and do 30 push-ups, right? We wouldn't tolerate that. So it's a weird juxtaposition and the bracketing, the moral bracketing that we do around sport that is so different than any other venue and with children, right? With children.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. It is really well. We're on the same page on this. We need to get this information to people, and people who are treating kids like that need to get out of coaching. Like what are you,
Agreed.
If you're not going to have a positive or nil impact, if you're going to have a negative impact, then it's probably not the best thing. I think it's crazy because I think all of us have stories, but my husband had a coach in high school that was horrendous, lots of swearing and yelling. And I guess eventually he got fired, but it took, 30 years. So
right.
30 years worth of teams of kids being, scared
assaulted.
of him. And
assaulted,
basically.
Right?
Yeah. It's just crazy. Okay. So what I'd like to end with is, I think, really applicable to all of us, because I have been that parent in the stand getting far too caught up in whatever thing I was watching of my kid playing and thinking it was the most important game ever.
Yeah.
So on page 102 in the book, you talk about just kind of what children really want from their parents when their parents are spectating or at a sport. So what is it that when you talk to these kids in your research, what they say they'd like their parents to be doing?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to tell you the answer to that. But what I want to start with is, for anybody who's listening, take the time to go ask your child, right? So if your child is engaged in youth sport, sometime take the minute to ask them and say, when I come to your games or to your competitions or to your events, how do you want me to behave? Do you want me to talk to you about the game before we get there? Do you want me to yell from the stands? Do you want me to talk to you about the game when we get in the car? What you will probably find will be consistent with what we know from scientific studies that have been done, which say that children say they want parents to be they like them to come, they like us to be there, but they want us to be silent and attentive, which just cracks me up. If you're going to cheer, parents, the kids will say, cheer for both teams. Cheer for everybody. Don't just pick me out. Don't just pick my team out. Cheer positive feedback to everybody at appropriate times, okay? And then they will also say to offer praise and empathy. Now, that's it. There's nothing in there about criticizing their behavior. There's nothing in there about demeaning the other team, coach, or officials. There's nothing in there about demeaning other athletes on the same team. There's nothing in there about doing a match analysis, right? Which I know you're laughing because it's ludicrous. I think most kids, they get in the car after the game is over or the competition, and that's what they get. They get their little micro coach and their parent who goes forth analyzing every moment of what they saw. And that's not what the kids want. They just want your support. They want you, when the game ends, to say, I had fun watching you play. That's it. That's it, right? I don't care won or loss. I had fun watching you play. That's all they want.
Oh, that is so good. And so hard for people. That really takes a lot of executive function. Parents need to get some exercise before they go to their kids' sport event.
Parents, quit sitting around at practice. You're at a soccer complex. Walk around, right? You're in a hockey arena. Walk around. Get some exercise. Do some squats.
Yeah.
Get up.
Unless I was the coach, I was never a fan of parents sitting at practices, watching practices. I never really got that. Those were great opportunities to go get an errand done, go for a run,
That's right.
do something.
That's right.
The games, sure. But I think that's interesting that, parents are thinking they're doing a great thing being so involved. But I agree that this guidance is so important, that the kids want us there and they want us quiet and positive.
And the other thing we know, one of my former students did a master's thesis where she found out that if you ask the children and you ask the parents about the parents' behavior at a game, the parents perceive that they give less direction than the children are hearing. The children perceive that their parents are telling them what to do all the time. The parents perceive that they're giving more praise than the children are hearing. The children aren't hearing the praise. We've got to flip that scenario. It's got to be supportive. Quit being critical. Quit telling them what to do, right? Sit back, relax, enjoy the game, and tell them how much you enjoyed watching them play. And that's it.
I'm going to write that as the exact, print this out, use these exact words. I enjoyed watching you play.
Audrey, put it on little cards and hand it to every youth sporting parent that you know.
Oh my gosh. I love that so much. Well, hopefully people will hear this and pass this episode along.
I hope so.
So Jenny, is there anything else that just burning that you'd like to share? I definitely recommend your book. Is there anything else from the book you'd like to share before we finish up today?
Well, I just really hope it gets in the hands of the right people. So if your child is playing sport, make a great gift for a coach. If they'll take the time to read it, I feel sure that they'll gain some kind of insights about ways to have a more positive experience with your child. I have incredible faith in the youth sport experience. I want every child to have a positive experience. And so it's really about us educated coaches and parents, for that matter, on how to help ensure that the kids have fun playing the game and really grow to love the game. That's it.
Absolutely.
So I thank you. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Well, I'm so glad to have had you on. Where can people find out more about you and your work?
Well, I'm at uncg.edu. You can look for me. My last name is Etnier. This book is being offered by the UNC Press, and it becomes available March 16th, although I think you can pre-order it even earlier.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Do you do any speaking? Do you go speak to, would you speak to a group of coaches or that kind of thing?
Yeah, mostly locally, but yeah, I do really like to do parent education and coach education. I feel like that can have the most pervasive effect, try to have a positive effect on the kids.
Yeah, I think we need to get you on the road with this book.
Yeah, thanks.
Out of North Carolina, all over the
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks so much for being on, Jenny. It's been awesome chatting with you today.
You as well. Thanks so much for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
As you can tell from our conversation, Dr. Jennifer Etnier really knows what she's talking about when it comes to youth sports and positive coaching strategies. I really encourage you to pick up a copy of her book, whether you're a casual coach or you just like to help your kids in sports. There's so much that we need to learn to help encourage our kids and not discourage them from being athletes. Again, the name of the book is Coaching for the Love of the Game, a practical guide for working with young athletes. My favorite this week is the Challenge Success website. It's challengesuccess.org. And I recommend you visit the parents section where they have some excellent downloads about PDF or playtime, downtime, and family time, and other tips to help your child thrive. My listener question this week is one that I've heard quite often. Help! We don't have time to have family dinner together. I know it's so important, but it just doesn't work with our schedules. What should we do? The reason that family dinner is such an important thing is not because of the meal or the time of day, but because of the regular time to connect with each other. So in many families, because of sports or kids' evening activities, it just gets too hard to all be together during the dinner hour. So instead, consider doing something at a different time of day. Some families choose to do a breakfast together. Others have found that kind of a late evening tea time or dessert together where we share our highs and lows of the day and have the same kind of conversation that we might have had if we had dinner together, just later in the evening. That works sometimes for teens and other kids who have busier schedules until later in the day. And it's something nice to look forward to, especially if you have some fruit or something sweet or a cup of tea or something that's kind of soothing as a way to end our day together and just connect. As always, you can find notes, links, and other resources related to today's conversation by visiting my website at sunshine-parenting.com. While you're there, be sure to sign up for my email list so that you don't miss out on any of the great resources I have available for raising thriving kids. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd really appreciate you sharing it with a friend. Please take a moment to give Sunshine Parenting a rating or review on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. Let's end with a quote from my book, Happy Campers. Kids thrive with structure for the same reason most adults do. When we know what to expect, we feel less stressed and more relaxed. The unknown causes stress, and there are many unknown things in life for which we cannot prepare. While the process of setting up structure, rules, and routines in your family might stress you out if you are a parent with a more free-flowing personality, know that you are taking an important step for your children's well-being by bringing calm and predictability to your family's daily life. If our kids can depend on some predictability and structure in that very important place called home, we provide them a safe, calm buffer against a chaotic world. I'm Audrey Monkey. Thank you for joining me for the Sunshine Parenting Podcast. Join me again next week for more conversations about raising kids who become thriving adults.